My mother held up her wine glass and said, "We always knew which daughter would marry well, and which one would work for a living. Some of us just accepted it earlier than others." The table laughed. My sister Daniela laughed loudest, her hand resting on her fiancé's arm like she was steadying herself from the joke instead of throwing it. I was 41 years old, sitting at my parents' anniversary dinner, and I smiled the way I had smiled my whole life, the smile that costs nothing and gives nothing away. Behind me, in a warehouse across the city, 3 paintings worth more than this entire restaurant waited for my signature to be released to a museum in Madrid. Nobody at this table knew that. Nobody at this table had ever asked what I actually did. My father raised his glass to finish the toast. "To Daniela," he said, "the daughter who makes us proud." He didn't say my name. He never needed to. The absence had become its own kind of sentence, repeated so many times across so many years that I had stopped waiting to hear it filled in. I was 8 years old the first time I understood the shape of it. It was my birthday, and my grandmother handed me a card with $20 folded inside, then turned to Daniela, who'd had a piano recital the same week, and gave her a gold bracelet. "She has a gift," my grandmother said, not unkindly, simply factually, the way you'd note the weather. Some children are born with something. Others just grow up. I was 12 when I won a regional art competition, a still life of my grandmother's kitchen table, rendered in pencil with more patience than most 12-year-olds had. My mother glanced at the ribbon, set it on the counter, and said, "That's nice, sweetheart," before turning back to the phone call she was having about Daniela's dance recital costume. The ribbon stayed on the counter for 3 days before someone threw it away with the junk mail. I was 16 at a family dinner when my uncle, 2 glasses of wine in, looked across the table at me and said, "You know, it's good you're not the pretty one. Means you'll have to actually build something." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when 19 people are watching to see if you'll cry, and you've already decided you won't give them that. I was 22 at Daniela's college graduation. She'd gotten a degree in communications, switched majors twice, taken 5 years instead of 4. And my father stood up at the family dinner afterward and gave a 15-minute speech about her resilience, her brilliance, her bright future. I had graduated the year before, top of my class in art conservation, summa cum laude, and the only acknowledgement I received was my mother asking, mid-meal, "So is that the kind of job where you'll actually get hired somewhere? Or is it more of a hobby thing?" I was 26 at a holiday dinner when my grandfather, the family patriarch, looked between us and said the words out loud, the way certain truths only become real once spoken. "Daniela is the one who shines. The other one," he gestured at me without using my name, "the other one is the reliable one. Every family needs one reliable one. Reliable. Like a kitchen appliance. Like a thing you don't think about until it's gone." I was 29 when my mother, helping me move into a new apartment, looked around at the modest space. I'd kept my real life carefully separate from theirs by then, a small rented place I used as a front, while my actual home sat 11 minutes away under a different name on the lease, and said, "It's fine for now. Not everyone needs more than this." She meant it as comfort. It landed as verdict. I learned, over 30-some years, the precise difference between being loved and being tolerated, and I learned to live gracefully inside the second one, because the alternative was to keep begging for the first, and I had too much dignity left for that. The months before the anniversary dinner were full of smaller cuts, the kind that don't bleed but accumulate. At a family lunch, my mother mentioned, almost as an aside, that she'd seen photos online of some gallery event downtown, looked very fancy, very serious people, and asked if I'd heard of it, since I worked around art stuff. I said I might have heard of it. She didn't ask further. The truth was I had personally authenticated the centerpiece of that exhibition 4 months earlier, my name printed in the catalogue in a font no one in my family would ever read closely enough to recognize. 2 weeks later, my father asked, almost in passing, why I'd been away so much lately, some work trip or something, and I said yes, work trip, and didn't mention that the trip had been to a private auction house in Geneva, where I'd spent 4 days authenticating a contested 17th century panel painting that 3 different national museums were quietly fighting over. The week before the dinner, Daniela noticed the watch on my wrist, a gift from a museum board I'd consulted for, understated, the kind of piece only someone who knew exactly what they were looking at would recognize, and said, "Cute watch, where'd you get it, Target?" and laughed, and I laughed too, and said something vague about a sale, and she believed me instantly, because believing the lesser version of me required no effort at all. None of them asked. None of them ever asked. That was the quietest cruelty of all, not the insults, but the absence of curiosity. You can survive being underestimated. What erodes you is being unseen. The anniversary dinner was held at the restaurant my parents had chosen for their 40th, with nearly 30 family members crowded around 2 long tables, aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole architecture of people who had spent 4 decades constructing a hierarchy with Daniela at the top and me as the load-bearing wall nobody thanked. After the toast, after the laugh at my expense settled into the comfortable hum of dinner conversation, my father stood again, this time with an envelope in his hand. He explained, a little too proudly, that he and a business partner, my uncle Matteo, had been working for over a year to acquire a small, struggling family-owned gallery downtown, a place with sentimental value, somewhere my grandfather had once shown his own paintings, as a young immigrant with nothing but ambition. The deal, my father said, was finally closing. Tomorrow. All that remained was a final authentication and signature from the conservation specialist the buyers required, someone whose name had to appear on the legal transfer documents certifying the gallery's most valuable piece. A disputed regional painting whose authenticity had been in question for years, was genuine. Without that signature, the deal collapsed, the gallery went to a different buyer, and $400,000 of family savings, money pooled from nearly everyone at this table, disappeared. The expert is supposed to call tomorrow morning to confirm, my father said. Some specialist Matteo found. Very expensive. Very exclusive. We are lucky to have gotten her at all. My uncle Matteo, beaming, pulled out his phone to show the confirmation email he'd received from the firm 3 weeks earlier. He turned the screen around so the table could see the letterhead. It had my name on it. Not my married name, not a nickname, my actual professional name, the one printed in auction catalogs and museum credits and conservation journals these people had never once thought to read. Matteo had hired my firm without ever connecting the woman in the email signature to the niece sitting 4 seats down from him, because why would he? Why would any of them? The table went quiet first in confusion, then in the specific, total silence of 30 people recalculating everything at once. My mother's mouth opened and nothing came out. Daniela looked at the phone, then at me, then at the phone again, her face doing the math too slowly to keep up with the room. I didn't gloat. I didn't stand. I set my fork down and became very still, the way I'd learned to become still my entire life, except this time the stillness wasn't submission. It was simply the shape of someone finally being seen and finding she felt nothing celebratory about it at all, only tired, and a little sad, the way you feel finishing a long walk home in the rain. My father recovered first, the way he always recovered first, smoothing the moment into something he could manage. Well, that's wonderful, actually, isn't it? Family helping family. You'll sign tomorrow, of course. No, I said. I won't. The silence sharpened. My mother said my name for what felt like the first time that whole year, her voice climbing. You would let this family lose everything over, what, pride? After everything after everything you've what? I asked, and I asked it quietly, without heat, because I had genuinely lost the thread of what she thought they'd given me. I'm not refusing to hurt you. I'm refusing because I don't extend professional trust to people who've spent 30 years deciding I wasn't worth their attention. That's not punishment. That's just the truth catching up to where it already was. Daniela found her voice last, the way she always did, reaching for the script that had worked her whole life. You're being dramatic. You're punishing us for one joke. It was never one joke, I said. It was 40 years of jokes. I just finally have somewhere to put them. My grandfather, the one who'd called me reliable like an appliance, the one whose old gallery sat at the center of this entire deal, stared at me with an expression I'd never once seen him wear in my direction, something close to grief, decades too late to matter. I stood, gathered my coat, and left 30 people sitting in a silence none of them knew how to fill, because for the first time in their lives, the room didn't have me there to absorb it. By the following week, the story had already been rewritten in the family group chat, the way these stories always are. I'd overreacted. I'd let a misunderstanding ruin something everyone worked so hard for. Someone, my mother, probably, suggested I'd always been a little cold, even as a child, as though coldness were a birth defect rather than something built, brick by brick, out of every dinner where my name wasn't said. I watched it happen with the same stillness I'd carried out of that restaurant. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to anymore. The gallery deal collapsed within the month. I heard, secondhand, that my father blamed Matteo for vetting the wrong specialist. Nobody, as far as I know, ever said my name in connection with what actually happened. 3 months later, the legal transfer documents for that small downtown gallery were quietly finalized under a different buyer, a private conservation trust one happened to sit on the board of, the gallery's contested painting safely authenticated and properly credited, the building itself preserved instead of sold off in pieces, exactly the way my grandfather, in some earlier version of himself, might have wanted. I keep the original transfer paperwork from that failed family deal in a drawer in my office, the version with my uncle's signature, my father's signature, and beneath them, a single line that says authenticating conservator with nothing written beneath it. Blank. I never signed it, and I never will. Some nights, working late, I open the drawer and look at that empty line for a moment before closing it again, not because I regret leaving it blank, but because it's the only honest document my family ever produced about me. A space clearly reserved for who I was, and nobody bothering, until it was too late, to fill it in.